What's a red flag everyone should be aware of when attending a job interview? I brought up a company's awful Glassdoor reviews, and they got so mad, they ended the interview? Well, guess I dodged that bullet. I also did this, LOL, it was a Zoom interview, and they ended it, and sent me a rejection email, within 5 minutes, LOL. I love Glassdoor. My husband's previous company had a review that said, "Morale is lower than a third tour of duty in the sandbox." We used that line the rest of the time he worked there, because it was so accurate. If they tell you on arrival that the job you applied for is no longer available, but they have a very similar position that just opened up, leave immediately. It's a bait-and-switch tactic, coupled with a sunk cost fallacy. The new position will be identical to the original one you applied for, except the salary is significantly lower. They're hoping that you'll play along, because you showed up to be interviewed, probably desperate for work, and will accept any job, no matter the wage. Furthermore, the position you applied for doesn't really exist, or at least, not at the advertised wage. Or the positions won't be anything alike, and the one they end up offering you is door-to-door sales shit. My friend applied for a receptionist position, went for the interview, and was gone for over 8 hours, making everyone worry, and it's because they drove her to some seminar training bullshit for selling vacuums door-to-door, and she couldn't leave, because they basically took away access to her car. I once got hired for a management position, then noticed that not only were my duties not that of a manager, but my wages were substantially lower. When I asked, they told me they really didn't need a manager. I stayed for a short period, but realized that not only was the business run badly, but that the owner was not even willing to listen to his son, who was trying to help. I told the owner that if he continued the way he was going, he'd go bankrupt within 3 months. He refused to listen. I quit. Shortly afterwards, he lost the business. We don't like clock watchers here. We expect everyone to be committed. Expecting more work, for no extra pay. Getting mad at you when you leave at 5, even though your stated work hours end at 5. I got bitched at for punching in earlier than the +/-3 rule they implemented. I said, if I'm inside this building, and people can ask me questions, I'm getting paid for it. If you have to make any financial investment into the company, in order to work there. I interviewed for a window installation company, and did well on the test. They wanted me in sales, and said I needed to pay for a laptop. They would cover it, and take it out of my checks, if I didn't have the cash to pay up front. Well, the overtime isn't mandatory, but most folks stick around after hours, most days. Spoilers, the overtime is mandatory. If you need to log overtime, we'll meet to discuss why you aren't able to complete your work in 40 hours. Says my clinical supervisor, who works unpaid overtime, in an office where 100% of clinicians do the same. Had this happen in an interview? My interview was scheduled from 10 a.m. through 3 p.m., with a lunch meeting, meeting the technical staff, and finishing up with the director of PMO. I gelled well with the technical staff, got along well, and felt pretty good about it overall. Then the final interview window came up, and the HR rep said, "Oh, so-and-so is running late, can we meet up in 30 minutes? Which, of course, is not too bad. Then 35 minutes later, at 3:35 p.m., the HR rep finds me again, and tells me he got stuck in meetings, and can meet me in an hour. I said, sure, stupid me, and walked around outside, in 90-degree heat, in a suit and tie, waiting for my turn. I returned to the office in time for the interview, and was sat in the interview room. It was well past 5 p.m. when the director of PMO showed up, and 2 questions in, I requested to remove my jacket and tie, as I was sweltering, their AC wasn't working, and red flag if facilities aren't upkept. His response was, not stellar. I ended up not doing too well with that interview, as the interviewer was more interested in gotchas than achievements, things like, you have 9 of 10 technical qualifications for this job, but why not 10/10ths? Plus, he seemed irritated at having to do an interview in the first place. Later I found out, some of my work buddies had worked there, and said, that place was a shithole. So, this is a double red flag, one for keeping people late, even if they're not paid, and another, if the management can't organize a simple 30-minute interview, they won't be good to manage your interests, well-being, and future, either. If they lied about the salary on the posting. Also, if they refuse to discuss salary, or it's something that can wait, until after you sign the paperwork. Yes. I have had this happen 3 times. First time was in the 4th job interview, 4 office visits. I was confused why negotiations around stocks and PTO were going weirdly, and I finally asked if they were even willing to pay salary stated in the job ad. They were not, and I politely thanked them for their time, and wished them good luck finding someone experienced and knowledgeable to meet their needs at that price point. Second time turned out to be someone pretending to hire for one company, but were really starting a competing business. And they were only willing to pay in equity, no salary. Third, also only wanted to pay in equity, but didn't have a clear business plan, just some patents. I'm done interviewing at very early stage startups. Employees are either new hires, or have been there for 15+ years, with no in between. There is no room for improvement, it's better to leave for advancement. Or like a place I worked at, one person had been there 15 years, and the rest had been there 3 years, or less, some even less than a year. Later on, we found out, the 15-year employee was a terrible human being on multiple levels, and had basically ran everyone else off, while playing the victim. They asked me my political opinion, which I didn't think was right. I've been asked what university my father went to. He was a farmer. And what kind of house I lived in as a child. What kind of clubs my mother belonged to. The local women had some kind of handicraft get-together, does that count? And a variety of other questions, clearly meant to make sure they only hired people from higher social strata. I gave some bullshit answers, then left. I also had an interview at Microsoft, a long time ago. They used to ask, which of the 7 dwarfs was your favorite, and why? I answered, grumpy, we have so much in common. Ask stupid questions, get stupid answers. I once turned down a job offer, because they mentioned that the previous person in the position had quit after a few months, and most of the people I interviewed with seemed stressed out. Same. One time, I walked into an interview, and one dude is like, thank God, some help. Meanwhile, the main interviewer was trying to trivialize why it's normal to work 12 hours days, salary position with some bonus incentives on production. Yeah, I'm good. When you are signing all the forms they give you, and you are taking your time to read over every document, so that you can fully understand what you are getting into, and people come in and start telling you that you don't need to read this, and that just sign here, and so on. A job I almost took 10 years ago. Me, reading the contract. HR, that's a standard employee contract, just sign at the bottom. Me, thanks, I'll need to read it before I sign. HR, why? Me, anything I sign is legally binding, and so I will read it before I sign. Just give me a few minutes. HR, I have other things to do today, sign at the bottom. Me, thank you for your time. I won't be signing anything for a company that doesn't want me reading the employee contract. I left. F those people. Had that happen once. They tried to get me to sign things at moments where I was very busy, and got upset that I stopped what I was doing to read the forms, arguing I didn't need to, since they were basic ones missed by HR. One of them was a form saying that they were able to fire me on the spot if I spoke unfavorably about my job in any way. Even a minor complaint was grounds for termination. I asked about it. They said it was to make sure morale never goes low, and everyone remains thankful to work for them, so I quit the next day. Nobody wants to work anymore. You're about to find out exactly why nobody wants to work for them. Seriously, every single job I've worked that said that during an interview was toxic and grossly underpaid. I recall watching some news segment on the supposed inability to find workers after COVID, and how some were claiming it was the free money from the government. They interviewed someone just railing about how they couldn't get anyone to even interview. They were paying minimum wage. The interviewer came back a few weeks or months later, and the place had found employees without a problem once they starting pay a reasonable wage. Turns out, the real phrase is, nobody wants to work a shitty job for bad pay. We're a family, a dysfunctional one, with a narcissistic mom and abusive alcoholic dad. Work hard, play harder, aka, we're all functional alcoholics, and sleep is for the dead. Untracked PTO, this one can be a green flag, as long as they immediately clarify everyone takes at least 8 to 10 weeks a year. Otherwise, it's a nice way of saying, there's no need to track it, because we don't take any. Up to $X a year performance bonuses, you're going to make minimum wage. Buzzword bingo, when you ask, what you'd actually be doing. It either means, you'll be bored out of your skull, or regularly berated, for not being Superman. So, if you make it to the 6th round of interviews, you can expect, they're not really going to hire anyone. Cut bait. I interviewed with one of the big ticket networks. It's based in southern New England. The pre-screen call with the hiring manager went well, and our views about writing code, source control, and documentation were spot on, so I thought I'd give it a shot. When I arrived, they took my driver's license from me and told me they'd hold it while I was on site. Then they wanted to do a credit check while I was taking a series of grammar, basic intelligence, and JavaScript tests. I told them there's no way I was going to get my credit dinged with a hard credit check before an offer. The woman from HR just didn't get it. I made sure they stopped the credit check, collected my license, and walked out. I sat in the car for a minute, thinking about the very odd vibe of the place, how they treated me, and wondered about the culture of a place that would do these things. Since then, they have been outed for a whole bunch of issues, including, big surprise, HR ethics. Looking back, I never should have considered working in that place. I'm very happy where I work now. My boss is smart and flexible, and I'm doing good work, as opposed to screwing concert goers. Near miss. The biggest red flag I ever got was, we're looking to replace this woman who's dying of cancer. I'm trying to get her to quit, but she won't. We'd have to put you in a small place in the basement, but when she dies, you'd get her place. Not exactly warm fuzzies. Edit, I just wanted to add that this was at a medical school, no less. Caginess about the salary. One job I got handed was my predecessor's email, and they were openly talking about how I was underpaid, because I was underpaid. They had £22,000 more in the budget than they paid me, and cheapskated me on that. I lasted 9 months, and was furious. They F me for no reason, other than they could. Any job advert that says, competitive salary, I contact them, and say, I have a competitive CV. Shall we stop the bullshit now? One time at the end of my interview, she asked if I had any questions, and I asked, so, how do you like working at X company? And she said, well, I like the pay. I assume the interview was probably recorded, so, she couldn't say anything directly bad about her company, but was enough info for me that the culture is probably not all that good. Keep in mind, you are interviewing the company just as much as they are interviewing you. Make sure to come prepared to ask questions as well. You can find out some red flags through those. One of my go-to questions for an interviewer is, in the past 10 years, how many years have your employees received cost of living raises that meet or exceed the annual inflation rate? And how often have they also received merit-based increases above and beyond that amount? A shitty company won't answer the question. A good company will give you an honest answer. A great company will give you an honest answer of 10. I have 2 that are red flags. Had a guy one time ask me how old my children were. I think he was trying to suss out if I would be able to work all kinds of crazy hours. If they pry too much into your personal life, that's not good. Second, when most of the people you come in contact with haven't been there very long, like 3 years or less. That means lots of turnover. If it's new company or location, though, that wouldn't count. When you ask, tell me about a time when one of your employees really impressed you, and they cannot give you a single example. My current job gave me multiple examples of how their team members impressed them. That's how I knew I wanted to work there. In comparison, when I asked this in another interview, the answer was, there's so many instances, and I can't focus on only one. Which I interpreted as, I don't value my staff in the least. I was glad not to get that offer. A big red flag is when the interviewer talks negatively about former employees, or the person who previously held the position you're applying for. It can be a sign of a toxic work environment, where blame shifting, or poor management, is the norm. If they're willing to badmouth others, it's likely they'll do the same to you down the road. Being hired on the spot. I always thought it meant I was a great candidate, and if they didn't hire me on the spot, I bombed the interview. Looking back, They only hired me on the spot. Because they were desperate to find another person, ASAP. Every job I've had, where I was hired on the spot, made it very clear why their turnover rate was so high. The ones I waited a bit for the job offer ended up being great places to work.